Chapter 3. The Scent of the River. The scent of the river doesn't change much, no matter the season. Even when the ice is thick upon it, somehow the river's tang seeps through. After the moon of the cracking ice in spring, the river unlocks. The deep ooze of the bottom mud mingles with the woody fragrance of tree roots that grow on the banks and are scrubbed by the coursing waters. Faolan felt a quickening in his marrow as he passed the summer den and then the spring den where he had spent his infancy, tucked in the embrace of his second milk-giver, the great grizzly Thunderheart. He knew the den as soon as he saw it. There was a steep embankment, and just above it a large cave, where Thunderheart's last cub had been murdered by a pair of cougars. Faolan stopped. After all this time, there were still signs of a skid path down from the higher ground of the cave to the water. Stumps from broken trees stood witness to the grizzly's rage as, wild with grief, she had hurled herself toward the roaring river, only to find that it was too shallow for her to drown. There she had sat for hours, keening into the wind, begging great Ursus to take her life, until something snagged on her foot. At first, she thought it was a clump of river debris torn from the bank in the river's spring tumult, but it was not. It was a tiny wolf pup. So often Thunderheart had told this story to Faolan. Her words came back to him now as he stood on the spot where Thunderheart had found him, half a league from the tomb-fraw where the Obeah Shaban had left him. He would go to his tomb-fraw soon, but he needed to stop here for a spell and think. "I sought death," he remembered Thunderheart saying, "and you sought life. You were a gift from the river." There were no more stories now, for Thunderheart was dead. There were only bones left to gnaw to her memory. Faolan made his way toward his tomb-fraw. It wasn't as difficult to find as he had thought. He looked down at the bank gouged out now by 3 winters of rampaging ice and water. A pulse seemed to quiver deep in his marrow, and his hackles rose. This was indeed the place. There was a weathered rut that could have been the very one made when the fragment of ice on which the Obeah placed him had torn from the bank. So this was his tomb-fraw. This little spot of bank was where, as a mewling pup, he had been left to die. He circled it 3 times. There was a familiarity to the spot that stirred the scent glands between the toes of his paws, and he found himself marking the ground. Then he settled on his haunches and looked out at the river flowing gently by. A mist began rising as the river water, still cool from winter, mingled with the warmer air. The mist became thicker, furling and unfurling into undulating patterns that were almost hypnotic. The roar of the river's torrential rampage during the night he was abandoned came back to him. He gripped the banks now, as once as a tiny pup he had gripped the ice raft. All of the sensations of those moments came back to him. The dizzying nausea as the ice shelf bounced in the turbulence, the terrible cold when icy water dashed over him, and the roar that grew louder and louder. His claws still digging into the bank, he looked deeply into the mist and saw a familiar pattern. The same design that had swirled through the fire in his dream the previous night now swirled in the mist before him. In that moment, Faolan knew what he would do. He would bring some of Thunderheart's bones back to the cave high up on the riverbank and build a drumlin, a small mound, to honor her. It had bothered him that he had never seen the Loken of Thunderheart climb the star ladders to Ursulana, the bear heaven. If he made this drumlin, it might be a perch from which her spirit could leap. He would build Thunderheart's drumlin not on the place of his abandonment, but on the place where he had been found. This was the meaning of the Slan Layat for him. The mist had cleared, and the river ran on smooth.